I am here with Venkat and Tony from DuploCloud. Welcome, gentlemen. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about yourselves, just individually, and then we'll get started on our conversation.
Okay. Tony, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Tony Barbagallo. I'm head of marketing at DuploCloud. So I'm working on advertising, documentation, you name it. I'll take care of it.
Yeah. And I'm Venkat. I'm the CEO, CTO for DuploCloud. My background is I'm an engineer. My background started my career at Microsoft Research, and the research group went on to become Azure. So I was among the first 10 odd engineers working in public cloud, started with about like 100 servers. And by 2013, from 2005 to 2013, we grew to about like 5 million virtual machines. And across the ponds, we had Amazon, who were about 8 times bigger than us. At that time, I think my view of operations and DevOps was, I would say, very naive. I thought one engineer, 50,000 workloads, latest and greatest of compliance across the globe. That's a norm. But only after leaving Microsoft, when we moved to the Valley, we saw how every 50 odd engineers, there is one DevOps engineer. And to get to PCI compliance, it takes like 6 months to a year. And that's when we thought, you know what, all these hyperscale automation techniques that these big cloud providers have, they got to be made available to mainstream IT. And that's what led to DuploCloud. And we were found in 2018. And yeah, I think that's a nice segue to tell you a little bit about the company as well. But this is the background and how it led to DuploCloud.
Okay. So tell me, what are the challenges that companies have if they want to develop an application and it has to be GDPR compliant, or even if it just has to have good security policies? Like, what are the challenges in developing and deploying an application in the cloud?
Yeah, I think here the number one challenge, which hopefully almost everybody would agree, is to find a DevOps engineer. So now, why finding a DevOps engineer is hard as related to, let's say, a normal developer or a QA or a program manager? The reason is you are now looking for a skill set wherein you need to be an operator. So you need to know operations and all that availability and whatnot, the lower level public cloud constructs. Second, you need to be a security expert who understands the compliance standards and the security best practices and so on. Again, a function of IT and ops. And now you need to be a developer so that you can write infrastructure as a code. Such a skill has never existed. Developers are not operators. Operators are not developers, right? So this DevOps thing is like sort of a unicorn skill. And that's the reason, and that's the number one challenge that companies come across, basically, right? You find them, they're very expensive, you lose them. And even if you find them, there are some people who are more from IT background, have taught themselves coding, and it still takes so much time. And developers, they simply don't want to do ops.
Mm-hmm. And that's Venkat, you touched on it, but if you throw in the fact that they need to be knowledgeable on a particular compliance standard for their company, that must be even harder.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If you were to dig deeper into the points that I covered, right, that you need to know ops or you need to know the security standards, like the PCI guide for Amazon is 3,400 pages long. Right. And of course, that covers all the Amazon services. But even if you pick like 20 to 40 services that people use, that runs into hundreds of pages. Right. So, yeah, it's pretty hard to find these people, and especially have them. You'll find people, but they're mostly from IT background. They don't know programming. And that's the big challenge.
Yeah. And, I spend a lot of my time in writing content, and any document that long is going to be out of date. I mean, it's just almost a guarantee.
Exactly.
So it's interesting to pull back the curtain on DevOps, because when I write about DevOps, I always talk about like these two teams kind of getting to know each other, and you're talking about more like, it's really more like people who have both skills, which I can see would be hard to find.
Yeah.
So how does DuploCloud solve this problem?
Yeah. So effectively, what we try to do is that first thing is that we try to take the programming difficulty away from the user and make it easier for them. So what we did is we sort of built this platform where we sort of combined the programming, the operations aspect, and the compliance standard. So what do I mean by that? So what it basically means is that we built a platform which takes three high-level inputs. One is you can simply tell what compliance standard that you need to follow, PCI, GDPR, and so on. Second, you can give very high-level application specifications, which is how engineering teams interact with IT teams. And then third is you can say which cloud provider I want to be in. With these three inputs, the system has a rules engine built in, which automatically goes and auto-generates all the configurations without the user having to write any substantial code. And then not only does it generate the configuration, it makes it happen using a state machine. It keeps it in sync. If there is a drift, it raises an alarm. And then puts it back and whatnot. So we really try to build a DevOps as a service solution or a DevOps in a box solution.
And what are, when you say configurations, do you mean like application and database or VM or all these things?
Yeah, all of these things, basically, right? All the hundreds of lower level. So you could split it into two parts. Basically, one is, all those lower level compliance controls, right? Which I talked about, the 3,400 page documents, vulnerability scanning, virus scanning, CIS benchmarks, encryption at rest, and all that kind of stuff. So that's one part, the security part. The second is the provisioning part, which is and Tony, you can maybe pull that diagram that we have, the DevOps as a service. And the other part is all the provisioning, which is your virtual machines, your databases, your Elasticsearch, your Redis, Kubernetes, containers, and whatnot. So your DevOps stuff and your security stuff. So those are all the details. And then there is logging, monitoring, CI/CD. But by and large, you can split them into provisioning and security.
It sounds like a good idea because, what I've heard a lot about in cloud security is, first of all, it's challenging itself, but then there's this other layer of you don't always know what people are doing. This has been, I've heard this story so many times. Exactly. And these are like big companies. They'll find someone will say, hey, wait a minute, why is this thing sitting out there on the cloud? Like, who did this? Yeah. And then like someone's like, I did. I'm sorry. I thought it was okay. And like, so if you can lock down, you say, okay, if we follow this will ensure that at least we have all these things configured the right way or according to policy.
Yeah, and that's why I think we split our product into two parts. One is the provisioning system, which basically goes and does things the right way and whatnot. And second is there is a checking and a monitoring engine. Like what if somebody goes behind the scenes, they make mistakes and stuff like that. So that engine will basically catch it, raise an alarm, raise an alert, and send the information out.
Interesting. And in terms of compliance, does this have like does this help with the audit process at all? Or is there anything?
Yeah, eventually. Yeah. I think fundamentally what it does is that it basically puts all the controls in place and it basically sort of gives you the nice dashboards and reports and stuff. But I would basically focus more on the fact that it implements all the various controls. And then, you can integrate with softwares like Wanta, Drata, SecureFrame, and so on. All these auditing software, which when connect to the system, they will pull the information and they'll go green, 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 all good, all good, all good. But fundamentally, the system does the implementation, and that's how it helps in compliance and audit.
Hey, Venkat, I was mentioning to you earlier, but why do we or that our software automation solution have to provision these services in a compliant manner? Why wouldn't AWS or Azure, when I provisioned a VM or created a storage bucket, why wouldn't it just provision these things securely from the start?
Yeah, because because there are two different levels of abstractions, Tony. What Amazon and Azure and they are focused on is providing you the nuts and bolts of the system that you can put together in a certain way. And they want to give you choice and they want to give you the flexibility to do things, right? That's not to say that they want you to create a non-compliant infrastructure. Non-compliance is also very abstract, right? What may be compliant by SOC 2 may not be compliant by PCI. And in some cases, people may not even want either of these, and they may want something else. So that's why I think their focus is to focus on vertical solutions, individual services, and then the problem of putting these things together is left on the certified AWS, Azure engineers to do the job. And this has always been the case in the industry, right? I mean, VMware, Cisco, EMC, they did something. And then we always had certified people who would put them together and so forth. But eventually the industry moves on to a higher level abstraction. Like people moved on to infrastructure as a service from on-prem. And then today they're doing DevOps. And I'm pretty confident that in future people will move to DevOps as a service, something similar to what we are doing.
But it does get at this tension between this dual security model that, it's up to you, which gives you flexibility.
Yeah.
But there's a risk there, a potential risk, and you can see the challenge there.
Yeah. And also, I think one cloud providers are sometimes better than the other. I would actually put it, this is another insight that I've had, is that the cloud providers who have come more recently, like GCP and so on, they have actually solved this problem in a better way. But whereas Amazon, who've been around for like 16 years, while they are the best cloud platform with all the nuts and bolts and the best fundamentals, they didn't focus so much on these abstractions. And sometimes it's just too late, right? Because you have so many nuts and bolts that they are like, okay, you know what, let my certified engineers deal with it.
Right. Well, that's great. Is there anything else you'd like to share about the state of compliance and dealing with regulations in the cloud?
Yeah, I think this is by and large the problem statement, Hugh. So what I did want to convey is that, like, for example, if you talk about the audience, right? So our buyer is typically a VP of engineering or a CTO, effectively. So what's happening is that, and to some extent, I would say we are not bought by CIOs. What is the reason? The reason is that a lot of the CIO organizations have split IT into multiple silos. Whereas the DevOps as a concept works when you consolidate those silos. So what we have done is that we have further consolidated those silos and then sort of merged them into a service. So we lend ourselves automatically very well to organizations which are CTO and engineering driven, wherein they don't have these silos. Whereas if we have to go to CIO, then you have to split it into multiple 6-7 groups and whatnot. But as we going forward, we will see more and more consolidation of IT into a unified DevOps.
Mm-hmm.
And this has largely happened already in small and medium businesses. It's a matter of time when the large enterprises also adopt that, because they're also moving from their on-premise, right? So they have a lot of legacy to deal with.
Mm-hmm. It seems like you can see this trend in the industry where in the beginning, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of skills. And then that gets built into the tools. Like I think with data science, for example, like 5-10 years ago, nobody could find a data scientist. And now a lot of the data science is built into the analytics tools. So you still need the expertise, but it's like a certain amount of it is just there. It's probably DevOps probably going to be a similar cycle,
And here it happens every 5 to 10 years, right? I'll tell you the best example of that is public cloud itself, right? Infrastructure as a service. So what is that? You had too much complexity in VMware, Cisco, EMC, and Microsoft and Palo Alto and whatnot. Getting a server takes you 3 months and whatnot. They came and they say, click a button, storage, compute, network, done, boom, right? Then you gave a very good example of data science, for example, right? Like how Databricks came in and they consolidated Spark and everything else. Then SageMaker came in that consolidated AI. Now, even common people can do AI. They don't even need to know, for example, algorithms and stuff. And it's about time that such a thing happened to DevOps and consolidate all of these various functions and tools into a service.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's just a natural progression, I feel.
Yeah, I think so. If there's a need for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can remember a couple of years ago, I was talking to some people who were from the, traditional model of, buy the server, get it
Yeah.
delivered, stand it up, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it was almost like a psychological shock to this
Yeah.
team that
Yeah.
they set something up on AWS and they were like, 15 minutes later, it was working. They were
Yeah.
like, wait a minute, it's working? Like, this is supposed to take 7 weeks. What the hell's going on here?
Right.
And it was like they took they couldn't deal with it.
The same happens in our audience also. When we get them PCI compliant infrastructure in about like a week or so, they're like, really? I mean, like, how is that possible?
Yeah, interesting. All right, well, good. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I'd love to. We'll have you back again to talk about more cloud security and compliance issues in the future. Okay.
Sure, definitely.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.